All right, cool. So, I always do this sometimes before we get started. Show of hands, who has never been to a Next Evolution event before? All right, cool. Who has been to a Next Evolution event before? If you didn't raise your hand, something is very strange. Welcome to the Next Evolution. This is the event series that we're doing. Tonight we are focusing on education and training. Um, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Wren. I'm the founder of VRAR Chicago and the Next Evolution. I have a lot of passion around emerging technologies and specifically immersive technology, and that's all I'm going to say about me. If you'd like to know more, feel free to please connect with me or just come up and talk to me later. I'm generally pretty approachable. I hope.
You're
With
super approachable, Matt. What are you talking about?
that, this event has a couple of different names. This is the Next Evolution AWE Nite Chicago. This event is now and always has been 100% free to attend. That said, and I know Matt brought this up to some of you who, as you were checking in, it is not free to produce. We have this QR code up. This is for donations. We would love anything you can do to support us. If you can't, that's fine. There are other ways to support us. I will go over that a little bit more towards the end of the show. I'm going to leave this up just for a few more seconds. But you may have also heard me mention that we are also co-branded as AWE Nite Chicago. Give me 1 second. There are more than 30 AWE Nites all over the world. There is an upcoming event. AWE stands for Augmented World Expo. It takes place 3 times a year, once in the United States, once in Asia, which actually just took place, and coming up in Europe. Because we are an AWE Nite, we get a discount. So this is a 20% discount code for anybody who's going to be going to AWE USA or AWE EU. I'm going to hold this up again for the EU folks because I do know that we get some live stream folks who watch this for EU, and this is a discount code that they get to use. With that said, we would hope that you would consider attending all of the AWEs. You can attend live online courses for the XR community, by the XR community, and beyond AWE Academy. And I would just say check out awexr.com for more information there. The other thing I'll talk about really quickly, one of our other sponsors, we do have to call out our sponsors and those who help us to produce this. We are all in a space right now called 1871. Who's been here before? All right, you guys, a lot of you. Who hasn't been here before? A few of you. It's always great to have new people come into this place. 1871 is Chicago's technology incubator. They allow us to use their auditorium space for this event. They have since 2019. Normally, we would have actually somebody from 1871 to talk about the venue here, but I will say check them out online. They have a lot of programming for technology startups, any sort of technology company that's, if you're in Chicago and you're going to be running, you should definitely be considering 1871. Our other venue sponsor, we alternate between 1871 here and 2112, which is Chicago's creative technologies incubator. So anybody who's dealing with film production, audio production, video, live sound, essentially the creative technologies, 2112 is a venue that you guys should be checking out as well. With that, I'm going to toss it over to my virtual host, Caroline, to speak to introduce herself and frankly speak to the virtual venue.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Caroline Dennis. Happy to be here tonight. I have a company called 2 Degrees, and I'm really working in the intersection of immersive technology and Web3. And Web3 is tossed around enough, but really it involves self-sovereign identities, decentralized communities, and also immersive tech like XR and security all wrapped into one. I care about a lot of things. I'm involved with a lot of organizations, including, in addition to the VRAR Chicago Advisory Board, I'm also involved with XR Women, which I'll share in a little bit, and Symphony, which is a sustainable smart city working group, part of an organization called IEEE. So I want to also just spend a little bit of time talking about XR Women, which I have my little XR Women pin right here. We are a group of actually over 1,000 women globally from almost 60 countries. And we're really passionate about supporting and engaging and inspiring more women to both take an industry spot as well as inspire women to collaborate, mentor, learn about all things around spatial computing and AI. So we meet every week. in one of the platforms we meet in is Frame. So I encourage you to try out Frame. It's a great platform. There's a lot of different communities that happening here. So we are in a place, like we said, in Frame. And I think what's cool about Frame is that the fact that you can enter this community by a single browser click, which in the world of virtual reality is pretty remarkable. And when Matt and Tom are working with us, we simply have the ability to pop in and pop out. We ask that if you are here in the virtual audience that you mute yourself unless you are speaking, and we will have a chance to have questions and answers. Um, so yeah, back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Caroline. With that, we do want to really quickly call out some of our community partners who've been helping us out. So Vanity is who provides our NFT for each of these events. 2 Degrees, as Caroline mentioned, the Independent Game Developers Association, Envision, and Patched Reality. We also want to thank our beverage partners, Revolution Brewing and System. For those of you who do grab the System seltzers out of the fridge, I do want to make sure you note there are varying levels of alcohol in those. They are 0%, a 5%, and an 8%. So just please check which one depending on what you want to grab. But with that said, yeah, we want to make sure. Do we not have an NFT for tonight? We have no NFT for tonight. Okay. We had a little trouble with the NFT system earlier today, so there won't be a non-fungible token tonight, but anybody who did register and or check in at the venue, those both count towards the giveaway at the end of the year. And I'll speak more about that towards the end of the show. But with that said, Caroline, why don't you introduce the topics for tonight and let everybody know why we're here?
Sure. Thanks. So, in the classroom, augmented reality and virtual reality are not just making learning more engaging, they're transforming how students and adults interact with material, turning abstract concepts into tangible experiences. Textbooks can come to life in virtual classrooms and foster personalized learning, creativity, and student agency. Immersive tech is helping bridge gaps in education, promoting equity and inclusion, and deepening the connection between learners and content. VR is also reshaping training programs across many industries, from healthcare to workforce safety and beyond. These technologies are not only accelerating learning, but also reducing costs and improving outcomes. With VR simulations, organizations are seeing fewer workplace accidents, faster onboarding times, and significant reductions in travel expenses. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by leaders who are at the forefront of this transformation. We have Steve Garrow, Chairman and CEO of Induvo, Laura Brown, independent learning design consultant and courseware developer with Mindset Learning Design, Noma Shields, founder and director of the Youth Sports Science Institute, YSSI, Craig Herndon, director of strategic alliances at the Glimpse Group and board member of Boston VR, and Jen Coffey, global immersive learning and experiences lead for Accenture. We hope that today you'll have new ideas, actionable strategies, and a deeper understanding of how VR and AR can revolutionize learning experiences and help individuals reach their full potential. Thanks for being here. Let's dive into this exciting world. Matt, would you like to introduce our first speaker?
Absolutely. So, Steve, why don't you make your way up here? So, Steve Garou, CEO of Induvo, brings over 20 years of expertise in driving growth and innovation across global organizations. Under his leadership, Induvo is revolutionizing the use of immersive technology to transform education and training, making advanced learning tools accessible to everyone.
Thanks, Matt. I think it was about 6 years ago when I met Ron, Patrick, and Matt we were at M Hub in one of the very first, the first M Hub actually, So it's really great to be here again. Huge fan of VR ARA. So if we could, maybe we'll start into the slides. So our company has built a user-generated content platform. We're an authoring tool that allows everyday people to create immersive and interactive education and training content. We typically work with what you see on the left. So if you look at slides, this is an actual slide from one of our customers in the Air Force, the US Air Force, and they teach people hour after hour with these blue slides that have bullets on them that just go through rote material. And what we turn it into is on the right-hand side. And so you're able to interact. It's an immersive experience created by a trainer or an instructional designer or a professor. If you could tab to the video. Yep. We'll just do I'll show you what that looks like in real life. So if you're, imagine sitting in a room all day, it's hot, there's no air conditioning, and you're listening to somebody talk and teach with you for PowerPoint slide after slide, or you could learn in an immersive way with, oh, yeah, okay. Oh, it's probably just the music. So I can talk over it. So you can see these are instructors that are in teaching about various pieces of aircraft. We use it to teach weather patterns. We use it to teach landing patterns, landing zones. All of this content is in PowerPoint or PDFs, even worse, where they're flipping through books. So instead, the students are able to come in and experience learning in a real immersive and interactive way. Okay, we can go back to the slides. Okay, so the next one then. The way the software works is very simple. It's much like Canva or Figma or other no-code tools. So you're able to upload 3D models, video files, picture files, PDF documents, and you drag them into the virtual space and you arrange them around the space and then hit record. And all you do is interact with all that content as you're teaching, just like you normally would, but now you're doing it in an immersive way with a headset on. When you're done, then you're able to save that little recording into our platform, and then you can distribute it just like you would a YouTube video or a social post on Instagram or something like that. And then students are able to come in and consume that content. So there's many different types of, the next one, please. So there's many different types of content that you can bring in. And then the next slide, I'll give you some examples of what you're able to do and use cases that we've had with a number of our customers. So we do a lot of industrial type of training, which is expensive and also sometimes very difficult to maintain that training, keep it relevant. It's also difficult because it's a lot of safety issues. So we do a lot of safety related things. Also, if you're training on something that's very big, like an aircraft, or very small, like molecules, that kind of training is really well done inside of Induvo. The latest thing that we're doing is doing a lot of LiDAR ingestion. So if someone's out on a job site or in the field, they're able to take a LiDAR scan of something and import that 3D model into the software and then record what they're doing with that or what happened. So maybe it's an accident, like for an insurance organization who has to document what an accident looked like. So all these different types of use cases. The last thing I'll talk about, we can skip through to probably most of the end of it. Yeah, this is just the examples in greater detail. Yep. There we go. So our company was founded by myself, as well as a very good friend of mine, a pediatric cardiologist at the University of Illinois. And he works in the med school at Champaign that actually combines engineering with med school. And he and I decided, I was lucky enough to exit from a sale of a company about 7 years ago. We wanted to build a platform that was free. And we wanted to build a platform that allowed everyday people to create content and share it for free. And one of the things we talked about is imagine if we could build something so that somebody in some other country had access to the US's best physicist or physics teacher, and they could take that content in an immersive way. So our platform is built completely for free. So if anybody wants access to it, you're able to do that. You can create as much as you want, as long as you're willing to share it with everybody else. If you're not willing to share it because it's got proprietary information or things like that, then there's a license fee. But a lot of our work is done with the NIH and doing biomedical research, and we work with a lot of hospitals. We segment children's hearts and are able to have surgeons look at that segmentation in immersive content. So all of these things are done, and we're really building a platform and a company that make it free to bring education to the masses and underserved organizations. but we're funding that through the development of a commercial platform for industrial uses. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And just so everyone's aware, before we jump to the next speaker, there will be the opportunity to ask any of our presenters questions. So, everyone's going to come up here and do a very quick presentation. We actually don't go over logistics anymore in the opening. Everyone's going to come up here. They're going to do a very quick presentation about who they are, their area of expertise, what they do. At that point, it is up to you guys to actually lead the conversation. So the audience here in the virtual space and online in the live stream, all of you basically get to lead the conversation once we get past the initial presentations. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Caroline to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Matt. And Laura, if you want to come up here and join me here.
Yeah.
I want to introduce you to Laura Brown. She's based out of San Francisco Bay Area, and she's designed learning experiences to physical and virtual communities for over 10 years. From web apps to massive online courseware to virtual reality. Laura's programs have leveraged emerging technologies to reinvent how students learn. Welcome, Laura. And if you want to come on up right to where I'm standing, that would be great.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. I'm managing webcam.
That's okay. If you click
All
on
right.
your seat button, because it may be that you're still sitting unless you're, there we go. Awesome.
All right.
That's all right. See, that's what this is. It's all a learning process for all of us. So great. And your slide is up there on the screen.
Perfect.
And
Great.
if you are able to walk up over here, just maybe your arrow buttons would be easier so you're not zipping around. Great.
Working. I'm not able
Yep.
to see the slide.
And maybe if you just put yourself a little bit further in, sort of under my head, a little bit more under my head on the stage so that people can see you. There we go. Right there is good. And then turn to face us. Awesome. Awesome. All right. Take it away, Laura. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you to all of you watching physically. I'm not able to see my slides right now, but
That's okay. If you want to just turn yourself around so you can partially see the screen to the
there
other
it is.
side. There you go.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I've been working in learning design for most of my career. I actually started when I was 19 years old, working as what's called a modified supplemental instructor for UC Santa Cruz in California for their academic resource center. So I've been working with specifically at-risk peers. I also grew up as an at-risk youth. And these are students who grow up in usually pretty challenging environments. So whether there's domestic violence at home, or they have learning disabilities, or single parents, or there's substance abuse at home, where there's just kind of something going on that would be distracting us on the day-to-day that makes learning quite a bit harder. We see dropout rates quite high. If you're familiar with the preschool to prison pipeline, all of those students would be considered at risk as well. Within the education, sorry, can you hear me?
I can, but I made a mistake and I'm sorry, Laura. If you can turn to your screen in the middle and put the webcam on so that we can see your face on the screen. We didn't need to see my face. So you turn around, you should see that share webcam. And you give it a second, and then we'll be able to see Laura in full screen when we're hearing her talk.
Is it working? Let's see. I'm trying. Sorry, guys.
That's okay. Did it have any menu that came up when you clicked? Did you see that button that said share webcam, or was there a different menu item?
There's nothing else. Let me kind of back out a little bit.
Okay. You might have to.
Are you sharing your webcam next to you? So is your avatar's webcam turned on? You usually have to turn that off to share it to the screen.
Okay.
Right. I think you did that, or maybe you didn't. So you do have to turn that off. So turn that little camera button off, so it's now white instead of blue. And then that should allow you to point your mouse towards the screen.
Did that. Not wanting to.
Okay. So maybe the solution here is to Matt, if I think what we'll do is for a second is we'll have you go from in and come right back in, Laura, because I think it might need to refresh. Or no, actually, you don't need to do that. Maybe just go to the top of your screen
Okay.
and click on the browser that you're in and click that, and it'll bring you back in. Sorry, folks. For us, we're kind of flying the plane as we're going here.
Yeah, I saw the buttons come up now, so she should be good when she comes back in.
Yes. Okay. So Laura, if you turn around, I think you should hopefully be able to see the
Yep.
share webcam.
Let's get to see my place. Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
Awesome. All right. Nice to see you. So sorry to have to interrupt
No,
your
it's okay.
speaking, but you can maybe regroup just a little bit and get you right back into it. Thanks everybody for your patience.
Appreciate. Yes. This is kind of part of the industry, right? Working through these challenges. Can everybody see and hear me now? Okay.
We
Yes.
can.
Yes.
Yes.
Confirmed. Okay. So I won't repeat myself, but working really specifically with high risk populations of students. In my younger years, and now that I'm an adult, I work with full grown adults as well. So I've been working with first responders for about the last 7 years or so, specifically law enforcement, and more recently, in the last few years, fire rescue teams. Really focused on performance optimization based around objective based standards, but kind of taking into account the fact that we're working in really high trauma, high stress environments, and we're also training in them and we're training for them. So that's really something that we need to be thinking about versus what I would call kind of more normal learning environments where we're in a traditional classroom space. You can, I've been, let me see if I can see all this. So I've kind of covered the gamut in my career. I've started in policy and data analysis. Um, had a hard time kind of seeing all of the things that were going on, so dove into being a designer. I've been in that space for the last decade or so, as well as a product owner for specifically immersive and AI related products for the last 10 years. You can switch slides. I don't think I got that control right.
Next slide. Yeah, great.
Okay, you can go back one slide. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just looking at mine too. Just kind of to cover again what specifically I'm talking about are folks that have very low resource availability. So the benefit of using an XR solution or an AI solution is that we're usually really hampered when it comes to the number of teachers or trainers available, as well as the actual training facilities that we're able to use. So being able to put things into a virtual environment helps us actually improve our scalability, as well as the quality of the education that we're providing. For folks who are in a very high stress or chronically traumatic environment, being able to go in headset also helps us focus in specifically on the training at hand. I haven't read a ton of studies yet in terms of stress mitigation within VR, but we've found that it really does help with focus, depending on what we're training on. We're training people who are trying to learn survival dependent life skills, especially in the at risk youth space. So, people who are trying to get out of high school into college and into their careers. And even more so when we talk about special needs, we're talking about students that require patience and empathy and expertise coming into their environment, as well as safe, secure, and sane environments where everything's somewhat predictable and easy to approach. So VR is actually a really good vessel for that as well, since we're able to get everybody on the same page really quickly if we're doing a classroom-based deployment. So if you want to flip to that next slide. And I just want to talk through this in case anyone else is working in this space. The type of student and learner that we're used to working with. So we're used to high stress environments. We're all vulnerable to stress. I don't think there's anybody who's showing up to an emergency scene that's really having a great time with it, especially if things aren't going well or as they planned. So we do see all sorts of behavioral conditions and states develop over time, especially if we're not adequately training students or leaving them in certain situations where there's really high uncertainty. So I just want to kind of paint this picture in terms of what we're dealing with and what we're designing for, in terms of how stress works. And stress really impacts our ability to interact with one another. If you're familiar with PTSD, this is something that comes up quite a bit in our in the industries of emergency and crisis response. If we're doing mental health crisis response, we're actually also responding to someone who's often in this state of mind. So really having a lot of intelligence around the way that stress impacts the body and the mind is really important for us. So stress, fear, and anger tend to cycle in on each other as we kind of lose performance efficiencies when we're stressed out. If anybody's, I think we've all had high stress moments where we've sort of bungled or fumbled or bricked on something, and that can create sort of a death spiral where we're kind of going out of control. Um, we have different words for that in law enforcement. They refer to an OODA loop, which is when we're kind of trying to observe, orient, decide, and act, and we kind of get out of we kind of get off of our feet. So thinking about this in the context of developing VR or immersive training, we have to be really mindful of what we're designing so that we're not actually creating or exacerbating these cycles within an immersive experience. And there's certainly been a lot of VR experiences, especially in the early days, that were really focused on trying to freak out users or trying to kind of overstimulate them. So that's something I'm really mindful of in terms of what I'm bringing into the classroom. And we can go to the next one. And here's just a couple examples of projects I've been on over the years as a product lead. The first one that's on the left side of the screen is a personalized learning platform called Sarago that was the recipient of a Gates Foundation grant back in 2014. We were using a distributed practice algorithm to help students that were at risk better retain their memories for kind of low level remedial types of topics where we tend to have a lot of memory deprecation within students who experience a high amount of trauma and anxiety. It's really hard to kind of encode things when you're distracted or kind of getting interrupted with certain thoughts throughout the day. So we developed that program. That's an example of personalized learning. So dependent on how you're performing specifically on the content that we're feeding you, the algorithm's going to decide when that's going to come back into your learning queue. So if you're not performing well on a specific learning objective, the algorithm knows that and more frequently presents it to you, versus if it's something you're doing great on, you're not going to see that as much in your study schedule. And it'll move you on to more challenging material so that you can advance more quickly. And then on the right side was a project that I led for a company called Axon, which is a very large police technology company. It was called Empathy Development Training, specifically focused on use of force training when we're responding to mental health crises. One of the biggest challenges we have in mental health crisis calls is understanding what the individual is experiencing. And the goal of this was to immerse the trainee into the actual headspace of the caller or the individual who needs help, whether it's a psychotic episode, a suicidal state of mind, or autism. And the goal of this was to help police officers better understand members of their community where they're really not getting any of that kind of training anywhere else. So, just a couple examples of how VR and XR can impact both sort of the back end of how we think about displaying or deploying knowledge and information, as well as the front end experiences that define what that learning experience actually looks and feels like. So yeah, I won't run too much longer than that. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Laura. And as we said, we're going to have some time for questions after we have others introduce themselves. Really appreciate it. Back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Laura and Caroline. Okay, Noma's already making her way up here. Thank you. So Noma Shields is the founder and executive director of the Youth Sports Science Institute, where she blends sports training with STEM education for high school students using cutting-edge XR technologies. With a deep commitment to social justice and a strong background in nonprofit management, Noma is dedicated to equipping young people with the skills needed to thrive in both athletics and academics. Take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, well, hello everyone. My name is Noma, founder and executive director of the Youth Sports Science Institute. You go to the next slide. Uh, Next slide. So, a bit about me. So, I am from Chicago, from the south side of Chicago, the Inglewood area. And I went to school at a small school in the middle of Iowa called Grinnell College, where I studied sociology with a minor in psychology and had opportunities to travel around globally after graduating. But for me, once I came back to Chicago, I always wondered, why was I able to get such a high quality educational experience? Um, from leaving Chicago, from leaving the US, that I couldn't get exactly where I grew up in Inglewood. And that and that experience, along with a lot of my professional experiences, led me to want to come back home and really immerse myself with the youth that grew up in similar circumstances as me. at the Park District. I'm a Chicago Park District kid, and and the Park District was where I played, where I made new friends, where I had my positive peer-to-peer social interactions. It's it's all I knew growing up. And I was lucky enough to have an opportunity to become a youth boxing and martial arts instructor, and also teach self-defense to kids who usually would use all that angst, as we saw in the last slide, use all that angst, that aggression on the streets of Chicago, but wanted to channel it in positive ways through boxing. And but they always had one complaint: I love sports, I love to play, but I'm failing academically in my classes. And I was thinking, like, oh wow, sports and science actually go hand in hand. How can we develop more tailored curriculum models to meet students where they are, to actually where they can play, can have fun with their friends, they can do their favorite sports, whether that be boxing, basketball, soccer, and still be educated along the way simultaneously. And that's what led to the Youth Sports Science Institute. Next slide. Oh, here. Okay. Sorry. So, just an overview of YSSI. So, we create custom curriculum models. We work hand in hand right now with After School Matters and the Chicago Park District, where they tell us, oh, these are the sports that a lot of youth are involved in. Right now, it's boxing and basketball. And these are what we want them to learn. So right now, the STEM concepts that we teach them is data science, augmented reality, and virtual reality. But we found that just immersing them in a different environment than what they're used to, it immediately takes them away from the circumstances that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. It creates those positive peer-to-peer social interactions. It provides them an opportunity to get away from the violence that they're experiencing every day, potentially at home or in their neighborhoods, but while also getting a high quality tech and data science educational experience. We found that, based on research, VR and AR can either be an opportunity to bridge the digital divide that's happening across America or further expand it. When I first started YSSI, a lot of people told me, wow, you really started an expensive nonprofit endeavor where you need where you need you need $300, like, each MetaQuest costs about like 300 to $350. And but we said, hey, for the youth that we're working with, it's worth it. They're worth it. They're worth to get MetaQuest 3s, Apple Vision Pros, high quality curriculum models that really guide them along their sports and STEM journeys with us. Next slide. So, of course, we can't do it alone. We do it with our partners here in Chicago. We use people's different skills and expertise talking with people, getting feedback on our curriculum, making sure that, hey, when students, for example, in our boxing analytics and tech program, students are getting high quality boxing instruction, getting high quality data science instruction from the University of Chicago's Data Science Institute, but then also now working with fabulous people such as Patch Reality, and where that they can also envision themselves not just seeing a MetaQuest as like just as another system like the PlayStation 3 or the Xbox, but hey, when I put on this device, I can one day be an app developer. I can one day be someone who like it's just so many different jobs that go into like engineering the MetaQuest or pushing new technology, that they just don't see it as a game, but they see it as a future career path for themselves. And that takes a community here in Chicago to do so. Next slide. We found that um, our curriculum really immerses students based on our blended learning model. So 38% of students in after school programming are right now involved in sports. 32% are involved in technology based after school programs, and 27% are involved in STEM educated programs. And that blended learning model is shown in our sports analytics and tech program, where we blend both sports, technology, and data science together in one curriculum. Next slide. And we teach students how to collect your data. Of course, like when you think about who wears smartwatches in the room, when you're wearing a when you're wearing a smartwatch, you're always collecting your data. You're collecting data on your BPMs, on your stress levels, on your heart rate, on your number of calories burned. That data that we have, we provide our students smartwatches. The data that they collect from their smartwatches, they do a series of drills. Sometimes they get tired of the drills. They're like, oh man, another drill. But we're like, yes, you need multiple data sets in order to then put that into Google Sheets, learn how to utilize Google Sheets, then learn how to transfer your Google Sheet, clean your data set so that you can then import it into Tableau. And then from Tableau, you can then create different data storytelling visuals with a platform that we just introduced to them called Flow Immersive, where they can really use AR and VR technologies to be immersed in the data that they created based on their own health analytics. Next slide. In addition to our sports programming, we also are in partnership with Columbia College Chicago, where we have youth take photos of themselves during their sports workouts and use those as reference photos to create their own, turn their 2D art projects into 3D using multi-brush and gravity sketch. Um, it's also important, like we realize that while there's like a sense of tension and competition that comes with sports, we also want them to know that, hey, on your rest days, when you are feeling more artistic and wanting to use a different part of your brain, you can also use virtual reality, augmented reality in these ways as well. And just the technology integration in the arts, we saw our students really take off from that, where they were able to have like play around with their avatars. Students who would sometimes bully each other in the classroom, they weren't doing that in the virtual world. They just had different ways of interacting with each other and were creating these new memories based on their group projects that they were doing together. Next slide. But yeah, that's Youth Sports Science Institute. If you want to learn more, you can contact me at Noma at YSSI Shy. And yeah, thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Noma. And just so while I'm getting ready to hand it over to Caroline, just so you guys are aware, these presentations will be online. So everything that's provided to us, it'll all be online. It'll be available basically forever. But with that, Caroline, would you like to introduce the next speaker?
Sure. I'm going to welcome Craig up to the stage here and get myself off camera so Craig can go ahead and join that. Thanks for joining us, Craig.
All right, let's get the avatar and then, so the only thing that wasn't clear to me is, should I, because I was expecting to just screen share instead of have my webcam, but if I guess my slides are being in the
They're already, yes, we already have your slides, so you can actually just, yep. And I should have let Laura know, but you can use your left mouse to angle your head back so that you can click on that and you can actually look at your, yeah.
That isn't clear to me is advancing the slides.
Sure. And we will do that for you. So you can just say next slide. Yes.
Right, perfect. All right. Okay. All right. And then, of course,
okay. So I do want to get a chance to officially introduce you. And okay. So this is Craig Herndon, everyone. Craig has been involved in the XR community since 2013 through Boston VR, which is a community, the MIT Reality Hack, which if you're not familiar with that, it's an incredible event. I volunteered at it, hosting countless events and hackathons and mentoring founders. Professionally, he's created simulations, trainings, products, and a number of other things with his current focus on healthcare and education. So this is great kickoff to the next phase of this conversation. Take it away, Craig.
And all right, so everyone can hear me now?
We can hear you. Yes.
All right, perfect. All right, so I am Craig Herndon, and I am Director of Strategic Alliances at the Glimpse Group. So if you're not familiar, we're actually one of the few publicly traded XR companies, and we work in a lot of different industries. So I'm not going to go over like the whole umbrella of everything that we do. I will say the one thing that's relevant that I'm not going to talk about tonight is we did recently get a $4 million contract with the DoD, working with a defense entity. And so that is something that I actually can't get into tonight. But if you would like to learn more about how training can be applied in that space, that's something I'm definitely happy to talk to. But tonight, I definitely wanted to talk more about how it's being used in public education, as well as in vocational training. So if we can go on to the next slide. Just at a very high level of what my company tries to do with schools. So we work with school districts around the country. So that's mostly in Massachusetts, as well as Texas. Region 10 are some of the biggest regions that we actually work with. But again, they are all around the country. And our main goal is to foster innovation, collaboration, and we're really trying to empower these schools so they understand the technology and understand how can I adopt and use this. And it gets down to very specific things like making sure you have a charging cart and making sure that you have a clean box in order to clean the headset. And just the things that if you're not familiar with the technology, you're just not really going to know how to do. So there's like the actual physical deployment of using the headset, but there's also looking at the different programs. So I have 10 use cases I'm going to be talking about tonight that I see as like one of the core pieces for XR in education. So if we go to the next slide, the one of the four like main goals and things we try and do is one is just working with schools and districts to just make sure that we're updating the curriculum and then making sure that we're using the latest technologies to empower the teachers, but also cross-discipline working. So it's making sure that teachers, it's not, XR isn't just for the IT teachers, it's for the biology teachers. It can empower the physics teachers and even empower the English language learning teachers. And so that's part of what I'm going to get into when we talk about the different focus areas. But it's also just training the staff on the fundamentals of XR. Because if a teacher doesn't know how to turn on a headset, then they're not going to want to use it in front of their students. You want to make sure that they're confident with the device first. So we actually do professional development, which I'll also get into. And then the last part is training the students as well. And this training part isn't just about like turning on the headset. It's also like how do you create XR content and how can you use that inside the room? And that doesn't just mean the headset. It can also mean, as we've seen tonight from other speakers, it can also mean on the phone, and like creating your own AR content for like science fair projects. And it's really about making sure that you're not just content consumers in the education space, but you can also empower them, that being the educators and the students, to become content creators. Because as others have said tonight as well, it's also a valid career path. So we go to the next slide. And actually go ahead and go to the next one just for time. So now I'm going to be talking about 10 different areas of focus that I just see on how XR is currently being used in the classroom. So the first one, if you go to the next slide, is teaching tech skills to students. So again, that's about empowering them and teaching them how to create their own, learning how to use image targets, creating their own part, and allow them to just be creative with technology. So they're getting familiar with deploying to their phones or even mixed reality content. And that's these for us, just so you know how we do it. It is live instruction where we actually have our Unity instructors working with the students either virtually or in person to deliver the classes. So moving on, just like a few of these examples, it could be, and I really need to meet the school where their technology is. So not all schools have headsets. So some of them you're working with PCs and Macs or iPads or Chromebooks. Some really need like WebGL because they're stuck on Chromebooks. And so there's like more you can deliver based on the technology is. So you have to understand where's the school with the technology. Are there grants out there? So in terms of grant funding, we're talking about ESSER funds, as well as Perkins funds. And this is just an example of some of the districts I've worked with. But if you move on one more, this is just an example of the different kinds of classes. So one is a Unity course, one is with the Reality Composer, so it's getting into the Apple side of things. And then the last, for a lot of schools that do have iPads, that's a great one. And then for schools with Chromebooks, that's when you're looking at CoSpaces. And what's really nice is all of these have the potential to be deployed to the headset as well if they have headsets. So you're really, again, you have to meet the school where they are in terms of the technology they have, but you can also use grants to help them get new technology, which again, a lot of the other speakers also do. So if we go to the next slide, and now we're going to get a little bit rapid pace here just to get the time. So English language learning, so that's VR. There's a lot of really awesome tools out there for how VR can empower that. But one example of what we did is we actually worked with a school district who, instead of just helping the parents, they instead of just helping students, they wanted to help the parents and bring them into VR and help them get integrated into the community. And it ended up being a program where people ended up coming out of that. They met in VR once a week, working with a English language instructor who otherwise would not have been able to meet them in person, and then was able to have talk with them in VR and really use that to help them understand. And this is a program where we're also giving them other resources, such as access to jobs. And the really final presentation was just incredible because you had people crying because now they're here, they're in the country, and they're also working in the local community and giving back. So we go to the next slide. Another like power area is training the teachers. So again, this is talking about the high level. How do I get this into the classroom, and how do I also giving them the skills of getting familiar with the device, but also how do I create and use this in my classroom? And that's really getting them familiar with these different. So if we skip 2 slides, another big one in terms of what I want to spend a little bit of time talking about is career technical education. So this is where the meat of how XR scales inside of education is once you tie it to the CTE programs and there's a real curriculum. So if you go to the next slide, so one example for that is what we have is the Medical Assistant Skills Lab. So over 107,000 students, both at the collegiate level as well as the K through 12 level, have gone through these trainings. And it's because in the health profession, there's basically the national standard is, and it's, do you do the same procedure in the US that you're going to do in Europe? And these 33 clinical skills, you can go through and repeat them over and over again. And VR is a cheaper option than trying to have a fully fledged and fully built out STEM lab or simulation lab where you're going in to do it. And then also, even if you have the physical lab, usually you have like one person doing the procedure and then 4 or 5 have to be standing around and they're just watching and doing nothing. Whereas with VR, I can do it over and over again until I'm familiar with it. So you really get the rote memorization as well as the active learning benefits of VR. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm just going to brief on here, real brief of just like the different kinds of procedures that are in this medical assistant skill labs. And just so you know, these are all required before students can go on and do their externship. So how does having VR in the curriculum also apply to the education system, right? So a lot of schools that reach out to us, they use it for dual enrollment with a local community college and they're either medical assistant or even nursing program. They might have a CTE pathway for the health sciences, which many of these apply to. So they may not use all 33, they might use some of them, but again, you're applying it to their curriculum that's mandated by the state for the career pathway that's been set for them. And again, it's coming back to meeting the schools where they are. And then the last part is just career exploration. So even if they're not interested in making sure that the students learned all the skills, they might be just interested in exposing them to skills. So like for 5th through 8th grade, exposing them to the skills is actually really important. Whereas in high school, you're actually trying to get them prepared and learning. And then at the college level is where you're trying to get a deep understanding of what it is. So if we move on to the 5th focus area here on the next slide. So this is using VR for health and mental wellness. There's definitely a lot of people I want to talk to about this because we did a study with the Yale School of Medicine where we were able to use VR for support groups and basically saw a reduction in anxiety, reduction in depression, an increase of overall resilience. And I could go into that study and kind of talk about it all day. But if we go on to the next slide, this is basically the headline for it, which is that the Yale School of Medicine finally published their paper last fall. And it's just really is heartwarming, and they've continued to use it with other populations. But the big benefit here is just being able to have an anonymous support group setting. So that way people feel empowered to talk through and you don't have to worry about body image issues. And there are definitely a lot of other use cases that I can go into at another time. But again, for time, we're going to move on to the sixth focus area here.
And I think we need to wrap up from here. So that's a good time to do that. Thank you, Craig.
So I'm just going to steamroll real fast and just talk about some different areas. So we're just talking about using it for STEAM, using it for giving students professional 21st century skills. I already talked a little bit about career exploration, giving students physical and physically active, as well as using it for special education. And so that is all. And we can give it on to the next speaker. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. If you can just click that red button at the top. Excellent. Okay, back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Caroline. So up next, we have Jen Coffey, who's already up here. Thank you, Jen. Jen Coffey leads immersive learning and experiences at Accenture, where she combines her passion for emerging technologies with over a decade of expertise in building transformative training experiences. A versatile professional, Jen is also a voiceover artist, career coach, and scrum master who finds joy in both her innovative work and time spent with her family.
Thank you for that, Matt. If you can go to the next slide. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Coffey. I'm here representing Accenture. I am the Global Immersive Learning Lead as well as Immersive Experiences. And you'll see if you move to the next slide, I'm not a technologist. I just play one on TV. Talking to everybody else here, I feel like I'm actually the new person in this space. So it's pretty entertaining for me. I come from an HR background where I've been building adult learning for probably about 15 years now. And so that's how I got brought into here. It's been a pretty big shift for me moving from being an internally focused role. And when the opportunity came to move into the metaverse, I said, absolutely not. It took a couple of different conversations and I realized that it was in my 5-year plan to move from being in an internally focused role to being in a client facing role. So let's try that. It was one of those things of this is scary. There was like a whole bunch of different reasons why this shift for me would be incredibly scary. And I figured it would be hugely challenging, but also rewarding. So that's why I decided to take this. So I moved into being the immersive learning lead at Accenture, and I focus on technology. And again, do not have a technical background. I've never been a gamer. I was actually a VR denier for quite a long time. And whenever I would talk to people once I joined this space, a lot of people would say, well, I don't think I can get my HR folks into this. And I said, well, if I can, I think anybody can. So let's give it a try. A little bit more about me. I mentioned that I'm a voiceover artist. That is my small way of getting back to my roots, which is theater, something that I miss and will get to in my future life. I'm very excited. I have a daughter and she just started theater as of yesterday and is loving it. So I'm really hopeful for the day where we get to be in a show together. That's my goal. If you want to move on to the next slide, I'm part of the spatial computing team at Accenture. This is just some of the facts about us, but anybody who's heard about Accenture always hears about Julie Sweet, who's our CEO. And the first thing she says is that we want our people to be curious, which means that learning is a huge, huge part of our organization. And immersive learning truly is the future of how we can be learning in a better way. It is far more efficient and effective for so many different reasons, which everybody on the stage has been able to take you through. But for me, it's been a really great way to learn. When I first joined the team, I found that our body of research that we personally did at Accenture showed that learners lose 75% of the knowledge that they gained within 24 hours of learning it, and 90% of that a month later. As someone who's spent over a decade building learning for adult learners, finding that they lost all of that, I panicked. And I was in a state of panic for a little bit when I first joined, but then I realized that that was what was going to fuel my drive to continue making this happen. And so I've really been an advocate, both internally as well as with my clients, as to how to utilize immersive learning and how it can benefit. At Accenture, we work with every single industry, with every single client, doing so many different things. So if you want to go to the next slide, here's a couple of my favorites. So at the very top, you'll see this is One Accenture Park. Whenever any one of our clients says that they researched Metaverse and Accenture, this is the first thing that comes up. We're well known for our onboarding program. When COVID hit, we realized that we were losing a big, huge piece of our own personal DNA as Accenture. Our people have always come to us for the opportunity to grow their network, to be able to be part of a true community. And when you're at home and you're only working on a TV or on a computer screen, you're losing that. When we brought in NJX as a way to offset part of their or part of their onboarding experience, we had so much greater passion for folks who were joining. Throughout this entire experience that's known as One Accenture Park, they get the opportunity not just to learn and to collaborate, but they get to experience what it's like to be part of an actual client project. So they're put into a cohort with folks who are literally around the world to be able to go through specific scenarios where they're solving for a fictitious client. This space is beautiful. It's built as a combination of corporate world, combination of museums, escape rooms, and Disney, essentially. You got your theme parks to make it a little bit fun. So beyond One Accenture Park and our new joiner experience, on the bottom you'll see on the frontline human services, this is our Avenues program, and this was created specifically for our public services organizations. And so you've got folks like Child Protective Services, police departments, health services organizations who utilize this. And this is a truly blended experience where they go into headset for about 20 minutes and they have a truly visceral reaction to what they're experiencing. The first time I ever went in, I actually cried. You get put into this situation, say you are the child protective services person, and you need to determine, is this the right situation for this child? Do I need to remove them from the home? And you're having this conversation with different members of the family, you're interviewing the child as well, and at the end you have to make a decision. And it brings out things like racial bias. We then take that and have a community conversation with the folks who went through this with you. So it's a combination of immersive learning as well as social learning. But then lastly, we go through the data. As everyone goes through this experience, we collect data and we're able to present what that looks like to the group. They then can infer, not just from the global experience, but for their specific region as well, what that meant, and be able to figure out, where do I have issues? Where do I have biases? Where do we need to upskill further? The next one, I just completed a program with my team. It's been about a year, but we took the topic of paving, which isn't always very sexy, and we turned that into immersive learning. And it's a combination of how do you do different tasks when you're performing a safe or a paving restoration, but then it's additionally fusing in pieces that they don't normally get to train on when they're in a construction role. It's how do I deal with an angry customer? If I'm tearing up their yard to be able to fix the pavement from a gas explosion, how do I then make them happy? If I'm impacting their business, how do I navigate those conversations? So it really was a fusion of the physical skills as well as what we at Accenture call power skills, formerly known as soft skills, to truly empower them to be able to be multifaceted in their role. And then lastly is my favorite. If anyone here is familiar with DaVita, they're a dialysis company. And we took their dialysis machine and created a digital twin of that machine to be able to take individuals through all 47 unique steps of utilizing that machine. Now, what that does is it trains you. You can practice that over and over and over again. And you don't have to take the machine off the floor. You also don't have to take a practitioner off the floor. And you also don't have to practice on a human being, which is great because this process requires absolute precision, and you get to build that confidence and know that process in and out before you actually go and process on a human being. So that one's been really successful for us as well. Next slide. What I see for the future of immersive learning is quite a bit. I think really where we're at is that AI is beginning to enable what we're building within immersive learning, not just how we're building, but what we're building as well. We're moving from conversation-based trainings where you're choosing from option A, B, or C as to how you navigate that conversation, to being able to have open flowing conversation. I always joke that immersive learning is your Planet Fitness, your judgment free zone. This AI enablement is really what's going to bring that forward even further. And the one piece that I think is the most important piece of the future is how we're going to impact our kids. I always joke that I grew up in the Chicago public school systems. I know less about US history from education than I do from Hamilton. And why is that? Because our teachers want us to memorize these facts, these dates, these names. I can't do it. But I know so much more about US history from watching Hamilton because of the visceral feeling of those emotions when somebody dies or somebody gets shot. The storytelling that's put in there, as well as the music. That's the stuff that we need to infuse for our kids so that they can learn this way. And my ultimate life goal is to take the magic school bus so that my kids can get shrunk down into a tiny little bus and go through my nose and go down the human body and truly understand what it's like, because that's really what the benefit is of immersive learning. We call it the RIDE acronym, but basically, immersive learning allows you to go and do things that are risky, rare, impossible, dangerous, or expensive, all through just either a headset or a desktop. Thank you.
Thank you. And you actually don't have to go anywhere. You can just sit. I'll have the other speakers come back up, and I'm going to explain while Caroline is setting up our folks in the virtual environment to be able to answer Q&A as well, how Q&A works, because we take Q&A from 3 spots. So real quick, actually, I'm going to ask a question. In the audience, show of hands if you are a teacher, educator, school administrator, anybody who's actually on formal education. I got a couple. All right, cool.
Okay.
Excellent. So with that, how Q&A works, so everybody knows. Number one, there is, in the virtual world, you have the ability to raise your hand. If you do raise your hand in the virtual world, raise it, keep it raised, because that's the order that Caroline will call on you. Tom will be watching for any sort of questions coming off of the live stream. Cut the slides in Rebel. Yes, I can, or in frame. I can cut the slides in frame so that they can bring themselves up. There we go.
Right. If you want to come up, Laura and Craig, then you can take over the screen so that you can be in the left and the center screen so that we can see you in the
And so here in the physical
person
space,
Let me get
we have,
myself off. Here we go.
I don't know if I want to ask Ron or Andrew or somebody who's got a microphone. I know there's a couple on the table over here. Andrew's going that? Okay, cool, excellent. So Andrew's gonna have a microphone. So basically, in the physical space here, raise your hand. I will be watching the order in which hands come up. So please kind of like make sure you keep them up so I see you. I will try to bring them up in order. Andrew's gonna have a microphone. He'll be walking around. I'll hand you the microphone, ask your question, hand the microphone back to Andrew. If we do have questions that come in over the live stream, Tom will read them off. Tom's got another microphone there so that the folks in the virtual space can speak to them. So the question is, who's gonna ask the first question? This is what I love. And Caroline will let me know if there's somebody in the virtual space who has one.
Yes, feel
Hey,
free
we got
to
a
put your
question right up
questions.
here. One of our educators. Yay.
I'm going to do 2 questions. The first one is a short myth busty question. So I have 2 young nephews, and I read somewhere recently that a lot of VR headsets aren't calibrated to the distance apart that children's eyes are, and it can cause vision problems. Can anyone corroborate that, or can I let my nephews play VR?
How old are your nephews?
8 and 10.
Unless I will say, presumably they will be getting Meta Quest headsets where you can actually.
Correct. They'll be using their aunts when they come and visit.
Awesome. You can change the IPD on a Meta Quest, whether it's a 2 or a 3. You can actually squeeze the lenses together, and that should account for anybody in 8 to 10. I will say personally, with my kids, they were using them as young as 6, despite the fact that that was against recommendations. So yes.
And no adverse effects thus far?
No.
Okay. Well, I'll stay tuned. My second question is kind of a wacky question. You're going to wonder, what is this girl doing here? But I am an advocate for the blind and low vision community. And we see tools like Figma and Miro being used in the workplace. These tools are not accessible. We've experienced some of this tonight, with these co-spaces that we're using. I'm wondering if there's anybody doing any work in blind and low vision accessibility on any of these platforms. And I'm not talking about the platforms where we're doing inherently visual tasks, like it probably doesn't make sense for those, but when we're using them in community where they're likely to be adopted for things like support groups and having emotional experiences and socio-behavioral training. Or is this just going to be one more thing that leaves this community behind?
Who wants to take that first?
I will say, I don't know what the answer is to that yet, but I do know that there are folks that are specifically focusing on that. One thing that I like to do is whenever I'm creating a solution for my clients, making sure that we can make it as accessible as possible, because there are many platforms that you can utilize from an immersive learning perspective that only want to be in headset because that makes it as immersive as possible. You're not distracted by your cell phone or pings or whatever that could come through. But that's not accessible to everyone, not just from the perspective of cost of what it takes to actually have a headset, but maybe you just can't wear it. We were having a conversation earlier before we started about motion sickness. Some people just can't do it. So I make sure that when I'm creating a solution, it is accessible both on desktop as well as in a tablet or a phone. And so there are folks that are specifically working on accessibility to make sure we have a responsible AI team as well as a responsible metaverse team at Accenture, that is exactly what their focus and research is on right now. I don't know that we have an answer just yet.
Laura or Craig, do either you want to jump in on this? I'm seeing no.
It's not an easy question, is it? And I like that question because I do think that there is a lot being done in the haptic side of things. So the physical, so being able right now put a pair of gloves on and you can interact with things in virtual reality. And I'm wondering whether there might be worth and research around spatial audio. Spatial audio is just the ability to have different levels of audio as if you're going in with a crowd and then you walk away from it and it gets softer. But I just think you're absolutely right that it would be really interesting to experiment with both spatial audio and haptic and the feeling. So this is, touch, the sense of touch. Um, I think it's something that needs to be researched. I will definitely share that with our XARC women community. We have a research portion of that, and I know Matt knows a number of people on the research side of things in the industry. So I think that's a really good. It's really important. So I appreciate that question. I'm sorry that we don't have direct answers for it, but I do think there's hope for utilizing a couple different kinds of technologies in XR.
Yeah,
So-
and using VR to kind of enhance or help people is definitely something that's been done. So even at the MIT Reality Hack this year, as well as like hackathons over the past decade, and then even in research, people have been trying to use pass-through and mixed reality in order to help the vision impaired. So there's definitely a lot in terms of how VR can help people. But in terms of making VR experiences accessible, you really do have to design specifically for people and where they're at and consider them. So having things like subtitles inside of an experience is often like something that really should be the default at this point, and unfortunately, it isn't. And I think we'll start to see more tools that just make that a default in social experiences, like even Frame, but also formerly AltSpace, but VR chat and others, where we're in these like virtual social environments. So that way everyone can be in. But there's also things you can do in terms of just highlighting objects and just really good user design that you can make those things bigger for people who are either vision impaired or motion impaired. So even for like QA for say like PSVR games, they actually do tests for being able to complete the experience with only like one controller in the hand. So there are certain companies that have even taken policies to try and make their platform more accessible, and I would say Sony is one of the front runners in that they do have a lot of accessible options. And really, when we create content, there's a lot that we as creators can do, but also in terms of how the technology can improve the lives of people. There's definitely a lot there as well that I'm really looking forward to see as mixed reality progresses.
This isn't really a question. I just want to kind of jump on an answer to that. And I haven't played with the MetaQuest like accessibility options, but I know that Apple has put a lot of thought into accessibility in the Vision Pro. You can do like high contrast, increase the font sizes. You can do voice. You can replace commands with voice. So there's a lot at the platform level that's being done. But yeah, in terms of designing experiences, for sure, as an industry, we have to get better on the accessibility.
I was going to say, I know Craig talks about MIT Reality Hack, and this is something that came out of there, so I hopefully am not calling somebody out on this. But one of the coolest things I've seen, I don't know, I spoke to somebody doing this earlier about the fact that they were asking, like, well, how are you going to do augmented reality for accessible people who can't see? And I'm like, well, are we talking no vision or low vision? They said, well, for low vision, I said, one of the coolest things you have on a phone is pinch to zoom. And I kind of joked at some point, it'd be really cool if we have really good pass-through augmented reality and you could just do real life pinch to zoom whenever you want. And it's been created. I've seen a prototype of it since about a year later after I said it. I saw somebody actually, I think related to MIT Reality Hack, use the Quest 3 and the hand tracking, and they basically allow you in reality to pinch to zoom for people who are low vision. So the point being, there are people working on this. It is definitely a thought. Obviously, like a lot of folks said, there's really not a silver bullet for how do you create VR for people who can't see. But definitely people are thinking about it.
The real answer is to make sure that those people are included in your testing, and that you just get their feedback and then make changes accordingly.
All right, next question. Do we have anything in the virtual space, Caroline?
I don't have anything quite yet. Does anyone have a question here that wants to pipe in? Jonathan, Ben, and or others? If not,
I got
we'll
one
keep
here.
going.
Again, I just want to make sure because I can't really see the hands go up. In the
That's
chat.
okay. That's okay.
So I know Norma, you mentioned the kind of the barrier with cost, right, to introducing something like VR in the education space, particularly for poor communities. And then I also know that Jen, you mentioned too that you were kind of skeptical about using things like VR and AR as well, in the HR area. In general, what does the panel think about what are the barriers to larger adoption in the education space of this kind of technology? Obviously money, but I think there's, from your experiences, like how did you overcome some of the resistance that other people had in the space to using this kind of technology?
Oh, I will start by saying that my own way that I got through it, which I think was really beneficial for me to be able to relay to others when I started in this space, was that my very first experience was in AltSpace VR, and I did it on my computer. And I did it on my computer the first 15 times before finally I said, fine, I'll put a headset on. I personally struggle really bad with motion sickness. I can't be the passenger in a car. I can't be the backseat in a car. I struggle when I'm flying. So I was terrified of it. I've tried VR over the last, I don't know, 15 years, and there have been times where I've actually gotten physically sick. So I was nervous about it. And I was literally, so many different teammates told me which ones to go into, which places to go into. Again, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but when you're going down a ramp, I close my eyes because I know that that part's going to affect me. And so it's talking about that, but it's also making sure that the things that we are creating can be utilized on desktop. Immersive learning to me doesn't have to be 3D. It doesn't have to be in a headset. That makes it cooler. That makes it more fun. But the only way it's going to be accessible to everyone is if it is something that's available on desktop.
Jen, I think we took a similar approach, and so our platform allows people to create and consume content on a tablet, on a Mac, a PC, in VR, and in AR. And we did that as a market choice because the AR and VR market have been kind of nascent and kind of bouncing along. But we also did that for reach, and a lot of the reach into schools is a good example of having those two-dimensional devices. I think the second thing that's holding things back, to your question, is some standards around content. And so a lot of the content that needs to be consumed in schools tends to be not overly produced, but produced content. It takes an organization, designers, developers, instructional designers to build that, to code it, to develop it, and that's expensive process. It's like building a Hollywood movie and creating a Hollywood movie. Once content becomes more user generated, like it is on YouTube or Instagram or things like that, we think that that's where ubiquity comes in, and more people have access to it to create as well as to consume it.
I believe it's also similar to what Craig was saying, like meeting teachers and school administrators where they are. And so thinking about the current curriculums that are already out there for after school programming uh, in like STEM education or in art education, and then telling people or like showing them through curriculum models, this is how you can enhance what you're already doing so versus just pitching like, oh, hey, this is why you need 10 MetaQuests for your classroom for a completely new curriculum that doesn't even meet like the Common Core standards. Saying like, okay, your curriculum is great, but this is how we can enhance it with new technologies, whether it's in sports, whether it's in art, and you continue doing what you're doing, but you can also teach students these new immersive technologies while you're doing it to like enhance their educational experiences.
Do we want to have those here speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can add just on the product side
Sure.
or program development side, the return on the investment should be part of the design of your program, right? So if it's not focusing on a training or learning objective where you're receiving an ROI by going virtual, you probably shouldn't be going virtual. That would just be my bias. Technology for technology's sake does not tend to be sustainable. So if it's something that's kind of cool or interesting and that's really all you kind of have floating the project, it's not going to probably have legs. So if you're looking for something that's going to grow with your educational institution or with the company that you're working with, making sure that you're really meeting a pedagogical need with the virtual application is really critical to make sure that you're actually saving money. So whether it's like travel funding or getting everybody in one room and you're using a virtual solution instead, or you're really hitting like a high liability type of training objective that benefits from the pedagogical application of VR or XR, I think it could be a little bit more challenging to make the case, even if the technology is kind of cool and interesting. That's just something that I've had to kind of really grapple with in my own projects, is making sure that this really is grounded in reality and is driving some sort of ROI.
Makes sense.
You jumping in on this, Craig, or move on?
I'll let us move on to the next question. I
Okay.
feel like Noma and Laura did a great job of answering.
I'll say one last thing I'll just throw in really quick. I used to say a lot what we'll do when it comes to getting immersive technology into schools is we'll help them remove the barriers. I've changed that. We now say we help them remove the perceived barriers, because in most cases, they think that there's barriers to this that aren't there. And Jen brought up a couple of them, frankly. And again, I won't repeat what's already been said, but this technology should have ROI from the start. It should be an enhancement. It should not be a replacement at this point. That is one of the, frankly, one of the fears that I see comes up quite a bit, is that, oh, this is going to replace teachers. No, it's not going to replace teachers. You still need teachers. But it does enhance the learning. And the one thing I think you brought up, 75% of learning for lecture is forgotten within an hour. There's a pretty famous study called the learning pyramid. It's actually the different value of how much is retained when you do certain types of learning. I think it's 5% lecture at 24 hours later. Learning by doing is generally how VR is categorized. That has 75% retention. The only one that is better is teaching someone else how to do something. Learn by doing, which is VR. Okay, next question. Well, actually, the funny thing is that was one of my canned questions that I was going to ask. So we have a question here. Yep.
Hi. So I'm trying to figure out how I want to frame this kind of as a question, but you guys spoke earlier about data collection and how it's useful in programs like sports. And I kind of wanted to prod your guys' mind and get your opinion on data collection within VR and XR. In programs where you are maybe doing law enforcement training and stuff, it's great to have data collection, whether it be checking their heart rate as they're doing these virtual courses, and so on and so forth. With the Oculus, you can track fingers, you can track head movements, and some headsets do pupil and eye tracking nowadays. So when it comes to education, and especially for young people, where do you see data collection being very useful? And then where can you see it becoming a sort of detriment to teaching these kids? There are some worries where, where when you're wearing a VR headset that has eye tracking, and an ad pops up, people have this idea that you can't look away or else it resets you. So as a student, when you're learning, there might be an instilled fear of feeling like if you're not paying attention, that's going to negatively affect you. So I guess to reiterate, where do you see data collection being very beneficial for education, and then so beneficial that it's actually detrimental in a way?
So we've built into our platform self-paced assessment. We've stayed away from looking at true exam or testing, but more self-paced assessment. The software just will capture if you get something right or if you get it wrong, how many times it took you to get it right or wrong, and how long it took. Um, we capture that data and just report it back to the instructor who created the content so that they can understand where their students are in the process. We shy away from using hardware platforms that collect and capture that data and use it in other ways. I think ultimately, though, what we'd like to see is building some correlation tools. So if we can capture that student and overlay some of the heat map data that does come out of the headsets to see, all right, well, students who scored well in their assessment that ultimately scored well on a test through a learning management system, where did they look? Where were they concentrating? And give that feedback. Um, that's the way we've seen data being used in a helpful way. And we've really shied away from allowing some of the algorithms to dig into our application because we're kind of cautious around giving more of that data away than we should.
I would say that we saw a lot of positive benefits with the data collection process, and that especially using like VR, AR, that it gamifies the way that students are collecting data through the different sports-based games that they play on the VR headset. So, they get excited to see like, oh, okay, I just played this game. How many like, for boxing, like how many jabs, crosses, hooks, what was my streak, what was my high score compared to the other students in the class. We have leadership boards for students to see like, oh, how did they compare to like peers in their class, but as well as if we have two groups of students, like how did they compare to the previous class? And then they get very competitive about it, and it makes it more fun for them. But just based on our like blended learning model, we don't want them to like just get excited about collecting data on like VR, AR, which we were like realizing. We also want them to get excited collecting data in real life, which is where like also wearing a smartwatch during their workouts, rather that be like a boxing in their boxing training. Also getting used to like reading the data from a smartwatch and logging that into Excel. And but then getting the data at the end of a game and logging that into Excel. So different ways to like different methods of their like to collect data um, has been like good for the students to be like immersed in the data collection process. But I guess the only downside that we experience is that sometimes like they get so immersed in like the workout, like sometimes sports it's very addictive. Same thing with like gaming, it's very addictive. But sitting down and actually once we get to the like, hey, you got to learn Tableau now, or you got to learn Power BI, or you got to really get down to the nitty gritty of why you collected this data so that you can do different data visualization exercises. Right now, we're running into the issue of like, how do we also gamify the step-by-step process for them to learn how to do data visualization and learn coding so that it's also equally engaging as the games that they play on VR or as the different drills that they do in sports.
I will say, from the enterprise perspective, there's different use cases. It's like immersive learning. Not every single learning is a good use case for immersive learning. Not every single use case is a good use case for collecting data. So for example, the Avenues project that I told you about, we don't collect any data. You don't sign into it. We don't say, this user got this score, this person had this empathy score, things like that. So there will be use cases where you want to track somebody's score and that has something to do with their job, but there is definitely times where that's not the right way to do it. And I think it's the same thing when we think about what we're doing with our kids, making sure that we're not collecting their personally identifiable information and making sure that any data that we do collect retains security.
I'd be interested in Laura's perspective on this from the law enforcement side and others with other barriers, because it is complicated, isn't it?
The law enforcement one is extremely complicated, which is why I tend to work across policy research and then product design. You kind of have to keep yourself abreast of what's going on. Even right now, we're having deep fake scam calls coming in that are using the voice data of specific sheriff's department employees. If you kind of look up news reports on this, so any like identifiable data is going to be hacked. It just seems to be what's going to happen right now with law enforcement. On the educational side, there's like HIPAA, on medical, and FERPA on the educational side. Within law enforcement, all of the data is sensitive. So we do quite a bit of research. NIST is funding research on this in terms of security protocols, the way that we authenticate officers into the technology that they're using. And then for me as a designer, making sure that I'm not doing a lot of design that's dependent at this point in history until we have really reliable security protocols that are dependent on biometric data coming from officers or firefighters or paramedics. Think about learning experiences or heads up display experiences that push data. So if we're talking about environmental data for situational awareness and incident command, that kind of thing, where I don't need to rely on, where their brain is at, where they're looking and what their pulse rate is. Another consideration for us is also unions, right? So when we talk about any of this data being used for inferential purposes that are not kind of explicitly stated under the educational training program, like fitness for duty evaluations. So if I'm able to see maybe you've got like a cardiac issue and I'm picking up that data through you're wearing a wearable and you're pairing it with a VR headset, what do we do with that situation? What are we doing with that data and information? Who ultimately has control over it? Um, is it the user first? Is it the department? These are all decisions that need to be made and kind of codified into policy. And oftentimes technology moves faster than policy or law and regulation. So I'd say we're very much kind of in this state of flux right now in terms of the industry and adopting this type of tech.
With that, before I jump to the next question, because we do have a question from online that's oddly related to this. Be aware of what's called SOPA, Student Online Privacy Protection Act. So when it comes to kids specifically and students, this is like policy is catching up. Anything that is related for SOPA, which is primarily meant for like computer-based learning, is going to apply to XR learning as well. The other organization I would say to get familiar with is XRSI, the XR Safety Initiative, Kavya Perman's group. This is, put simply, something that is everyone in this community is very aware of this as an issue. Privacy protection, data security, all of that. It's not like the founding days of the internet. Like, this is something that we all knew about going into this technology. So it is something that is, people are aware of it as they're building this technology from the start. With that though, just because Lorica was talking about how this technology would potentially be used for online training for officers, like ongoing training, from the web, from our live stream, we have the question of, do you see XR being accepted as a viable tool for accreditation for continuing education for a lot of the industries that require continuing education, such as doctors, nurses, safety inspectors, engineers? And if not, what do you think would be needed for this to be accepted as a CTE? And actually, Craig, I kind of want to throw that one. Think, do you see XR as being viable for CTE like as it exists now, or what do you think would need to be added to it for it to be viable for actual accreditation for CTE in the near future?
Yep. And so just touching very quickly on the previous question that kind of relates to this, is having like SOC 2 status or being integrated into an LMS and things like that are definitely something that a lot of organizations are looking for in terms of, before I can even adopt this, I need to do this, and making sure that your application, again, doesn't have any personally identifiable information in the accounts that sign up, that you're not storing that any long term for the personally identifiable information. In terms of like, and by CCU, are we talking about continuing career, like licensure kind of credits, or
just continuing technical ed and just the things you might get if you go to learning workshops for, let's say, engineering projects, and you can earn those just like, in theory, it's another badge, another process behind it.
Yep. And so several states are specifically starting to allow like a certain portion to be virtual, where they're like, okay, 40% of the training can actually be in VR, whereas the rest still needs to be done either in person or virtually. So we're starting to see those percentages go higher and higher in like specific states. And for those kind of CCUs, and this is in like the medical profession specifically that I'm thinking of, that we've seen. And it's a lot of it again with like Matt had mentioned the XRSI initiative. It's having technologists like us speak with our legislatures and help them understand that these technologies can actually help people. Because I think a lot of us know people who their CCUs is going online, I click start, and then I go and make my macaroni, and then I come back, and the video is over, and then I click next in the video. And so like we're not even matching like what the state is even trying to get out of even having these requirements for licensure and continued licensure. And VR, as we know, can make it much more interesting, much more engaging, make people actually feel like that's the part, you make them feel so that they remember, and then they'll want to talk about, no, you need to do this training because this is what I learned out of it, and you end up becoming excited about it. So having strong content that ties into the state's needs and requirements, but also just educating our lawmakers in terms of how VR can be a big benefit and boon to even just getting people to actually engage and take away learning from, and again, that 75 retention rate number and things like that. And it actually does require us to, and the XR Guild is another organization that's trying to do this, but it requires us to be active and involved in both the local at the city level as well as at the state level. But again, at least in the United States, we're talking about at the state level, where we really just need to educate and communicate with our own lawmakers. Even though you may not be like, oh, I don't have like a politics background, or I'm not an expert specifically in just data privacy, but as a technologist, you know so much more than our lawmakers do that your contributions will be extremely valuable.
So, Craig, we face something similar. We come out of the healthcare space, and a lot of the continuing education in healthcare has to do with hours of continuing education. And what we found is similar to the industry, which is there's a 75% reduction in time it takes. So if you take an hour-long class that's instructor-based with presentation, in XR content, we've found it's down to about 15 minutes of content. So we actually walked away from going down a very deep training path and certification path, because for us to fight that as a little startup company to change the paradigm wasn't going to happen. So I think there's some understanding of an hour isn't really an hour when it's in XR, because it actually is more immersive. It's better learning. It's more content that you can go through.
I think the other piece of it is you need to certify. You need to know that you have the right person. So it's like when you go and you take the SATs, they need to certify that Jen Coffey is the person taking this test. We don't have that technology to be able to certify that somebody is not putting their brother in their headset to be able to take their courses for them. So there's a lot of advancements that are needed.
All right, we've got another live question in the room that I saw. I thought I saw. Yes? No? Okay. And we're running up on the clock here, so we'll try and keep answers somewhat brief.
So as XR technology evolves, you see improvements in graphics and fidelity, especially focused in the gaming space. So I wonder if there's any evidence that higher fidelity experiences enhances or improves the educational aspect of XR training and education.
I will say I have had this debate for a long time, but when you think about the topic in the healthcare space of being in the position of having to train up on giving difficult messages, do you want to practice telling someone that their family member didn't make it through surgery by looking at a cartoon, or do you want to practice that on a real human being? You want that experience in that specific case to be as high fidelity as possible. You want to experience their emotions, so you understand what that, again, that word visceral, you want to understand what that feeling is like when it gets there. And so there are definitely use cases where, if I'm training people on a call center job, I can use anything. I don't need anything high fidelity. They technically don't even need imagery. It just helps when you think that you've got a person that you're talking to. So it really depends on each use case. But I think when you get to the point of trying to take them through, like I mentioned, Miss Frizzle someday going in the human body, you want to actually have really high fidelity graphics to make it as robust as possible.
Yeah, Jen, I agree. It's very use case driven. So you can do Magic School Bus with us actually if you want to. So we'll take you through that. But we take actual DICOM data from an MRI machine, and surgeons create a model to do that work. And they couldn't do that if it was an average heart. However, there's other use cases where it's maybe more manufacturing related, where you can take an average looking tow truck, or you can take an average looking machine of some sort and bring that in, and they'll still get the representation. So it's very use case driven.
I'm waiting
Laura,
to see
Craig?
you're going to jump in.
I've gone through this kind of with my population, and for us, 360 film has been a huge benefit just because they're looking for photorealism. Being in headset in a virtual environment when it's a bunch of kind of low resolution characters can get kind of fatiguing after a while, especially if you're experiencing a lot of lag. So I think just in thinking about how long you're putting people in headset too, as a consideration, I try to minimize the time as much as I can and transfer them quickly into a physical kind of applied skills environment. So it really depends, again, like they mentioned on stage, sort of what is the use case that you're going for. But if it's something that's high risk where there's like fine motor skills, especially at play, the higher the realism, the better for sure.
Yeah, and I would say again, it's very use case driven, and a lot of things when you're doing career training, you're very limited by budget, and one of the first things to get hit by budget is usually the fidelity, or it's even based on the technology you have. We're limited right now on what we can do with like a Quest 2 or Quest 3 and these mobile headsets in terms of fidelity, unless you're doing like Cloud XR. But again, that gets into your budget again. So there's lots of trade-offs there, but in terms of effectiveness, again, I would say it's kind of what everyone else has said in that it's very use case driven, whereas and then the other part is just in terms of accuracy. As long as I know that this is the object and it's very close and similar enough to that object, that's going to be good enough to make sure that I know how to do that in the real world environment. But again, if it comes to conversational, of course, you want to be talking to a real life human. So, but I will say it does, higher fidelity makes it more accessible to the general population. Absolutely. And higher fidelity is going to make it easier to sell if you have it. So it's one of those things, even just from like getting someone to put on the headset, which is the hardest part of all of this. The higher fidelity is always going to be a huge lead and help there.
All right, we're running up on the clock here, so we're going to get to the point because I do want to make sure that Jen has a chance for the final statement. So here's how the final statement works, and this is basically your guys' opportunity to start thinking about what your final statement's going to be. So for closing remarks, each panelist is going to be given about 20 to 30 seconds to give a closing statement, and pretty much it can be whatever you want, preferably on topic. But something, it's up to you guys. So you got about 20, 30 seconds. So each panelist will give 20, 30 seconds to give their closing statement. I will call on you guys in some sort of order. Caroline will then give her closing remarks. I'll give mine. We'll go through some very quick housekeeping. And then we'll close the show off, and hopefully everybody can stick around for a little bit of networking. And if you wanted to ask a question but didn't want to raise your hand and be on microphone, you can ask in person. For our virtual panelists, for those in the virtual audience, you can ask questions there as well. We will mute the virtual room in the physical room after this actually ends, and the live stream will end. But I've given enough. I've stalled as long as I can and given folks enough time to actually think about what they're going to go for their final statement. And I'm going to start with Steve.
So we're really excited about the potential for where XR is, especially in the training and education space. Those are the principles that we founded the company on. I think the real opportunity is not for the ultra polished high end experiences, because those sometimes tend to leave out socioeconomic groups that may not have as much advantage. And so we're very excited to see the ubiquity go out in XR.
All right, Laura.
Kind of just processing the things we talked about still. So just kind of at the end of the day, immersive experiences in XR are really about information and data. So thinking about kind of what information, how you're going to produce it, why you're producing it, and how you're going to distribute it is something that you should really be thinking about in the design process, just like you would if you were planning your curriculum without it. So I'll just kind of leave with that learning design thought.
Okay, Jen.
Well, we've all learned today, if you didn't already know, that immersive learning is a highly effective way of learning. Getting it out to people as much as possible is the way that we're going to change the future. I think we've brought up a couple of times the differences in socioeconomic statuses. And so I think that this is the way of getting this in front of everybody. And I will lastly say that I froze. Thank you.
Your last statement, and you forgot what it was. If it comes to you, you can jump back in. Okay, Craig, go ahead.
Yep, I'm going to continue on my last thought there, which is really just talking about the hardest part is getting them to put on the headset. And when you are starting with an organization, just let them even start with like one headset or 5 headsets and let them see the value of it. And definitely handhold them and help them in ways where they feel empowered by it and aren't afraid of it. That's the biggest part, because once they see the value, they're going to want to show it to everyone else, and that's where you go from a 5 headset deployment to a 100 set deployment to a district-wide deployment. Is just by having that one champion who really understands it and gets it and starts training other people for you, even when you're not there, because you can't be there all the time.
All right, Noma.
I would say, given that VR, AR is a new sector that's growing, emerging at such a fast pace, that an immersive community is also an inclusive one. And that if we don't want, especially students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to be left behind in the VR, AR community, it takes asking the questions, finding more funding opportunities so that we can bring this technology to communities that often wouldn't think this is even accessible to them, so that as VR, AR, XR is growing, that they're also growing along with the new developments that's happening in the sector.
Okay, Caroline.
I think the thing that I find with any new technology is that there definitely needs to be the the pass through, the hybrid, the combination of using things. So I am a big fan of enabling people to learn about spatial computing through these kinds of platforms where it doesn't take a headset. Um, I also am excited about movement towards the credentialing side. I'm actually working in a project where we're looking at talent passes, which will be um, essentially a self-sovereign identity with your skills. And those skills can be not just what you're studying, but they can be all the skills you gain in your life, and be able to have those in one central place. I think that speaks to the need to have more recognizable CTE or other kinds of skills so that people can visualize that. But I do think that that there are already amazing experiences today. We talk a lot about the future, but there are already so many right now. But as many people say, I think there's still, like, and Noma and everyone said, there's education to everyone else. And I do think collaborative environments are good like this. So yes, the training stuff is awesome, but I always say there's all these communities like in XR Women and here, come and be social and see what that feels like, because it is remarkable, and just conversations and networks. It's yeah. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Do you remember what it was? No. Okay. Had to give Jen that last chance. Okay. No. I mean, a couple of things that I've heard that have occurred a lot is, the accessibility of this, depending on where you are. Sorry, a little bit self-serving here. VR Chicago. If there is any school that wants to use this technology, call us. We have headsets. We have access to all sorts of software. We'll just bring it out. If you can't figure out how to pay for it, fine. We'll help you figure out how to pay for it. We'll work with a foundation. Like that, this technology is going to change the way people learn. It already changes the way people learn. Pretty much anyone that tries it sees the power of it instantly. So with that said, yeah, there are barriers that people think exist, just like there were barriers to getting Chromebooks to every single student in Chicago public schools, but now they have them. The barriers will fade away once people see the utility. And I think somebody else brought up ROI. You should be getting ROI from the start. This technology is powerful enough that the first use case should basically prove its value over and over and over again. And, as Craig kind of said, you do one deployment, you'll do 10 deployments, you'll do 100 deployments, it'll eventually be district wide. That's the way it's going to go. I'm trying to think of any instance where I haven't put a VR headset on someone's head where they've kind of said, oh, okay, I get it. It's this. There's the value. And I think that's going to continue. We just kind of frankly get a lot more people to try it. But with that said, we're going to end the actual formal stage presentation here. We're going to move on to a couple of housekeeping items and then end the show, and we'll get back to more informal. I do want to thank all of our presenters. So at this point, please, everyone give a hand for our presenters. They can leave the stage. They don't have to stand up here for this. Both in the live stage and in the virtual space.
Thank you.
Couple last things, and sorry, I'm gonna run through my script real fast because I gotta get through stuff. Okay, so as I said before, and I told you this will be up. This will be up again towards the end of the program. This is a free event to attend. It's always free. Thanks to those who actually did, by choice, contribute and actually purchase a ticket, because obviously you don't have to. But we will accept any sort of donations because we'd like to keep this going. And frankly, we can also support some of the stuff that we do at schools if we get enough donations. With that said, we have a couple of upcoming programs in the next few months. Next month we'll be here. I know sometimes we move between either here or at 2112 for the physical event. Next month we'll be at 1871. The topic is agriculture. Oh, I should put the slides back up in the room. Give me a second. I always forget that we take that off now. So there we go. Next month, we will be talking about agriculture, food, and natural resources. That will be taking place here at 1871. The following month, we're going to be talking about health science. That'll be taking place at 2112. And then the December event for transportation, distribution, and logistics will be back here. These are all of our socials. For those of us, frankly, again, for those of you who don't feel that you can donate and you can't support us financially, please just consider reaching out. Again, a lot of what this technology really needs is awareness. So we post on social media all the time. Follow our socials, share it out to your networks, ask a question in the comments. Anything that you can do will help us get the word out. And with that, I think, we don't have an NFT today, so we'll just leave the donation link up. And thanks, everybody, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Good night. Have a great night. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Laura and Craig.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody
Laura.
here,
Craig,
Ben,
thank you,
everybody
Caroline.
here.
Thank you guys in the room.
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, I feel like my mind is full with all the things that you guys presented and that you're doing and you're involved in. It's amazing. I can see so many parallels.